Welcome to the OShow. I'm Laura Babcock, and what a week to have as our guest the leader of the official opposition, none other than Marit Stiles with the Ontario New Democratic Party, the NDP. And I have to say that Marit, I saw you in the summer, but I saw you in a photograph of you wearing a very glamorous green belt, and you were signaling, you were signaling how focused you were on keeping the green belt front and center with Doug Ford. Now we've had 2 days of question period. I think you've been doing exactly that, but what has it felt like for you? Do you feel like you're just as focused and in that green belt fight as you were when you put that photo out?
You know, absolutely I am. I'll tell you, first of all, I always stop and say we should celebrate a victory when we have one. And Ontarians out there who were so upset about the government carving up the green belt, they won this, right? People coming together, farmers, environmental advocates, just people who care about the green belt. It was a victory, and I really think it's important to celebrate that. But there's no question that I don't, first of all, trust the government to undo the mess that they've made properly. And also, I think there's a ton of questions that come out of this that we need answers to. So, yeah, I haven't brought out the green belt yet, but it's waiting. I'm holding it for the moment when I need to again.
Well, I got a little nervous, I got to tell you, Merritt, when I saw that the Greenbelt Restoration Act that you put forward, of course, they weren't going to vote for one of your acts, right? But when I heard some of Ford's language around it, talking about, well, we were absolved by the AG and absolved by the IC, I thought, well, wait a second, that doesn't line up with the teary, almost mea culpa on Thursday, where he said, I've broken the trust of the people of Ontario. I want to restore your trust. It was this big, to me, folksy appeal for give me another chance because I've done wrong here. And then it sounded like he was back to his bombastic self at Queen's Park. So what did you feel like? Tell me where you were when you heard the news, if you can, that he was actually going to restore the Greenbelt lands. What did you feel like seeing that presser? And then how did you feel when you saw him the last 2 days across that small aisle?
Well, it's interesting because last week, on the day that he announced that he was going to reverse course on the Greenbelt, I have been doing a press conference, and I've been interviewed by media about this. And one of the reporters said to me, I'm hearing that maybe he's going to reverse course on this. And I literally said, I think I actually said this on air. I said, not a chance, not a chance. I didn't imagine we were that close, to be honest. But we had been hearing rumors coming out of their caucus retreat that he was under a lot of pressure. So when he made that announcement, I was sitting with some of my colleagues and staff, and I got to tell you, we nearly fell over. It was pretty sudden. But, like you said, I mean, then this is the interesting thing with Mr. Ford and his government is one day he acts all, oh, shucks, and oh, I'm so apologetic. And then the next day, he's pumping himself up again because he's so averse to seeming weak. And the truth is, this week in the legislature, they've been acting as if this never happened. And that's concerning to me because they say they're going to bring legislation forward to roll this back, and in fact that they're going to codify the Greenbelt land now in legislation. That's what I was proposing to do in my bill. And normally MPP bills, we call them private members bills, the government, may not support them in the end, but it is unprecedented. I think it's only happened a handful of other times that a government wouldn't even give consent to allow me to introduce the bill. So that was really a shock, actually, that they were that upset about it. And I think it shows you the fear that this government has in what might still come out. And I really believe we have just scratched the surface in terms of what the government's entanglement is with speculators. And I think there's a lot of other questions that have been remain to be answered.
Well, there was a story that just came out in Hamilton at the same time as, we're getting this kind of weepy mea culpa. There's lands that Hamilton did not want expanded in the urban boundary. 18,000 Hamiltonians wrote letters and many, many more protested. Minister Clark, the former Minister Clark, one of the two, or is it three now, Merit, who have left in this scandal? Three.
Yep. Two who left because of the scandal. One who left and we think is just looking, looked for a quick exit because he could get away from it all, but we don't know.
If you've got a good reputation, like Monty McNaughton, everybody could work with him and thought he was a good minister. I wouldn't keep my brand close to Doug Ford now either, but he says it's not connected. But anyway, the former Minister Clark, he said to Hamilton, no, ministerial prerogative or whatever, we're going to take those lands. And now we find out that one of the people who purchased the lands also purchased Stag and Doe tickets from a PC party organizer. So in Hamilton, which Mike Schreiner, when he was on from the Green Party on the OShow last week, he said Hamilton has been one of the driving forces of this Greenbelt resistance and the Stop Sprawl resistance. And so for us, it's very much alive.
Well, exactly. And, Ottawa as well. Ottawa is facing the same issue. And I think it does show you, look, it's not just about the Greenbelt. We're happy, we won this one, the people of Ontario, but it's not over because this government gives out a lot of these ministerial zoning orders. And I think that they're each one of them to some extent now, there's questions around it, right? Especially if we're not seeing them linked to, either, council plans and agreement or actually building truly affordable housing. And I think, once again, we're seeing more farmland being cut up and divvied up, and these are land speculators who we don't even trust. We think they may very well just go ahead and, and swap that out and make a lot of money off of it now. So it's very concerning.
Well, I'm glad that it's firmly on your radar because it can feel a little bit like cognitive dissonance in Hamilton. We're happy about the Greenbelt, but it still feels like it's happening to us, right? And there still seems to be some smoke around what's going on in terms of, is there fire similar to what was going on with the Greenbelt? So I know there's investigative journalists on it and you're on it, and that's great. What did you see looking across the aisle today? I mean, because he can say all he wants about how he was absolved and, and how great they are and all this other stuff and get, 50 standing ovations. But are you seeing something different in the eyes of his caucus or of him himself? Do you think that they're feeling the pressure of what's coming?
I think they absolutely are. I can see the looks on their faces. I see how unhappy they are. I can tell that Mr. Ford is very angry, and it's not a happy group of people, I would say. So there's, as you said, they do this kind of performance, but we do see them all the time, and of course, a lot of my colleagues and I, travel with them on committees. We know each other, and so we were used to seeing, walking down the hall and saying hello, and even if things are are pretty complicated at times, and that's really not happening right now. I think they're very unhappy. They're very worried. And I think the reason for that is clear, right? They have been, frankly, catching hell from their constituents for months and months. It is not a nice time to be a conservative MPP, I suspect. So, but from our perspective, what we're trying to do, and I hope people see this, but we're trying very hard to stay very focused, to not make too much light of the situation, because it is really serious, right? These are really important issues. They speak to the integrity of government, trust in government, and so we're trying to be as calm as we can on our side, and we're not always either. But that is it's a challenge. I can definitely tell that the Conservative government is feeling the pressure.
Well, they should be. And for a premier who came out and said, "Oh, shucks, folks, I need to rebuild trust with you," and then to sound the last 2 days like, no, he did nothing wrong. And, I guess, hopefully still codify the Greenbelt. And it sounds like you're on that, Merit. But it doesn't sound like there's any kind of lessons or learning there. So sometimes people put up a front, of course, because they want to project confidence. But we're seeing story after story, even today. It almost feels like every time I refresh my feed, there's another branch of this Greenbelt story, or if I can expand it out, Merit, or concerns of possible corruption in other areas like the Ontario Place deal. Right? When Bonnie said that that deal's done, like it's closed, I thought, can any deal that the Ford government's been engaged with be closed at this stage with everything we're learning?
I don't think so. I don't think it's done at all. I mean, I think the government tried to convince us that the Greenbelt was done. No, we can absolutely undo it. And Ontario Place is one of those things that, I think the government maybe thought they could get away with this because it's just a Toronto issue.
Right.
But I find as I traveled around the province that it's not. Even if people don't feel a connection to that public land the way that people in maybe Toronto feel about it, especially people who live, increasingly in condominiums or towers and renting apartments, small apartments, and that's an important public space. But people, in communities across the province are kind of saying, look, we're struggling with the cost of living, with finding affordable housing. And this government is spending $650 million at least to build a parking lot for a private luxury spa and a 99-year lease. Like, what does this? Who's benefiting from this? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so I think and as you know, there's a lot of things coming out as well around that deal. The government could stop that right away. And they're choosing not to, and they're hoping that nobody notices. But I think that it feeds into the sense, rightfully, that this is a government that has lost their way, that are only out to make special deals that benefit a few insiders at the expense of everybody else. And that deal with for the Ontario Place land really speaks to that, I think.
In the Hamilton Spectator, there were 8 letters about the Greenbelt. So this is after the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 8 letters in the Monday Hamilton Spectator, all of them absolutely excoriating of Doug Ford's government and of Ford personally. And the theme of you're not fighting for the little Joe and the little Jane. It's about the elites. So there is this now very strong sense of, Merit, I take your point, that anything this government is involved with, we're going to look at it through a lens of saying, well, wait, hold on, is this another elites thing? Or is this something that benefits the people of Ontario? And there are so many people who can't even access the housing market, can't access the rental market. There's no deeply affordable housing. We just had a scorecard come out on how bad we're doing on poverty. We've got, incredible increasing homelessness. So in this climate, at this time, post-pandemic, 2023, to have a government in a 99-year secret deal for a luxury spa on Ontario Place. I mean, I think, Merit, people are like, what are you doing? Like even conservatives must be.
And I think that's the thing. I think it is conservatives. I think conservatives are really angry about this. That's what I'm finding. I mean, I was at the International Plowing Match just a few weeks ago in beautiful Bowling Green, Ontario, near Orangeville. And this is a community that has, of course, a conservative MPP, but also, these are often conservatives. It's always been a very conservative friendly atmosphere, and people were really angry at the premier, and they were letting him know. And I found that everywhere I go in conservative ridings, people are saying, I'm never voting for these guys again. And I think that, part of it as well is to hear the premier now and his government members stand up and say, well, we're putting the land back in the Greenbelt, but, let's be clear, that means that housing won't get built. To me, it's the cynicism of that too. How cynical of them to try to pretend that that was ever about building affordable housing. It never was, and it will not have ever, it will not be. And people are desperate for housing. So when the government makes these deals, whether it's Ontario Place or, some MZO, people are saying, is this really to serve me? Who benefits from this? And Doug Ford was elected on this agenda of for the people. It was sort of post, liberal government. And he was like, I'm going to change things. I'm back to for the people. And this does not seem for the people. This is for the big billionaires. This is for the wealthy land speculators. This is not for the people.
I think the Overton window has moved on his government's brand. I think everything now is, well, hold on, prove you're not corrupt at this point. Prove this is a good deal. So let me just ask you, because you mentioned other deals, what about the 413? I mean, it feels as though there's some cross-pollination between the Greenbelt investigations and the 413.
Well, right. And once again, you're looking at like, where's the land? Who's benefiting? You have to follow these threads, because even where there is some small benefit, and I'm just going to use, just generally speaking, you could maybe say there's a little benefit here and there for some of these infrastructure projects. The folks who are ultimately benefiting are the people who own land there, who are going to be able to develop it, or, and this is what tends to happen, or just simply, now that it's worth more, sell it at greater value. And I think since we know that a lot of these same names keep coming up over and over again, and they also are people who have very strong connections to Doug Ford and the Conservative government, major donors, all you have to do is follow the thread. And I think this is where we're at right now. And so you asked me about, about question period and what things are going to look like in the next little while. And, opposition, we don't only want to oppose, right? We want to be out there proposing solutions. That's very important. And we will continue to do that. But it is also our job to hold government to account. It is literally the role of the official opposition. And so we're going to keep trying to shine a light into some of these dark corners of these deals. And I think it's gonna take up a fair amount of time in the legislature over the next while.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I liked that statement. I think I tweeted as much. Shining a light in the dark corners feels like exactly what Ontario wants, right? I'm not presupposing what happened with the Ontario Place deal or with the 413, but I sure as heck want to find out now, right? They've lost the benefit of the doubt. They just have, right? The trust is gone. So I was upset when I talked to Mike Schreiner about something Ford said at Ford Fest, when he said that, people in Ontario can have this $500,000 home with a finished basement and a backyard, and like it was ridiculous on its face. But I got angry because it was false hope generating, right? People actually believe that. So when you say that you're going to shine the light in the dark corners, I thought, can she do that? Can the NDP do that? Are there the mechanisms as the official opposition? Do they have the legislative power or the people power or whatever power?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a really good question. And I would say that, my first job out of university was actually working for an MPP at Queen's Park 30 years ago now. And at that time, opposition had a lot more tools. So there's a little background to that, right? Like, things have been watered down, and it wasn't just the Conservatives. It's all the parties have sort of slowly weakened the tools that the opposition has to call things into question, to hold things up, to review, and so it is absolutely true that there are fewer tools like that. But having said that, it's not impossible. We have managed to, on occasion, get the government to go along with certain things. And the argument we're trying to make is to the government, the longer they keep going like this and keep putting up obstacles, the more guilty they look. So my hope is that at some point, if they have nothing to hide, they will actually go along with us. But it's not easy. And I just today, I introduced a motion. I asked for unanimous consent to have what they call a warrant from the speaker to call two of the big developers who are named in the Greenbelt stuff, come out to and appear before the Public Accounts Committee to be questioned, so we could maybe get some answers from them, because they refused to participate in the Auditor General's investigation. And the government wouldn't, allow that. So yeah, it is frustrating. I won't lie to you, it's frustrating. That's why those victories are so important, right? Because with a majority government, the way our system works, it can be frustrating. But there are opportunities. And by the way, I really, when you were talking about the $500,000 homes, I totally agree with you. And one of the reasons that I decided to run for leader of the NDP in the opposition was the low voter turnout in the last election. That really breaks my heart. And I really believe that a lot of the reason why people aren't voting anymore is because they don't trust, obviously they don't trust politicians they don't believe things can get better. And that's because too many times, I think in part, governments have let them down. So I really does bother me as well. I don't know where he came up with that, uh, but I'm looking forward to seeing the details, I guess.
When it comes to setting expectations of what the opposition can do on this, is part of it just making sure that other investigations go ahead, like the RCMP one about privacy going forward about his phones? I mean, what's in the pipeline to support your work, Merit? Because as people in Ontario who it looks are ready to fight as much as we need to, we need some data, we need facts, we need truth to rally behind.
And you really saw in the last few weeks the importance of those independent officers of the legislature, we call them, right? The Auditor General, the Integrity Commissioner, the Privacy Information Commissioner. So, I'll say, this is a really good example because I asked for the two Integrity Commissioner requests. There are more coming, and they produced extraordinary investigations by the Integrity Commissioner, even though honestly the laws, but the legislation that he operates under in Ontario is pretty loose. It's not as strong as at the federal level or anything. But also the Auditor General's report and investigation. Now that was a result of three parties coming together. So when I became leader, I don't even know if I was officially leader. I don't think I'd been sworn in as leader yet, but I was looking at doing an Auditor General request into these deals, and we were sort of sorting out how we would come about that because it takes some creative work, and luckily we have a really good research team here. But I had a few people advise me that what, it's going to be hard for her because she's so independent and she doesn't want to be seen as being partisan or anything, if it wasn't just to come from only the NDP. So I went to Mike Schreiner and I went to John Fraser, who's the interim Liberal leader, and said, do you want to co-sign this with me? And we did. And I don't think we would have gotten that investigation if we hadn't done that. So these things are really important. And as you said, there are other requests out there. We've asked for the Auditor General to explore the Ontario Place deal. I've asked the Freedom of Information and Privacy Commissioner to explore whether or not the Premier has to share his phone records. He's been using his private phone for government business. It's pretty clear that's what's happening, and then he won't share those records. So we've asked them to investigate some of those things. So there's a lot more coming.
Just a couple last points for us in the time we have remaining. I thought it was really interesting when you said to Ford that, Ontario is far worse off than when he became Premier. And you actually, I think, got an oh my God moment out of the Premier. And it reminded me of a very successful tactic that was used in a US presidential election of saying, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And so it caused Ontarians to look at the last 4 years and go, wow, things have really gotten, kind of crazy. And so then he launches into this big, listing of all of his government's achievements. But meanwhile, outside, there's this cacophonous rally of thousands of doctors and nurses, and who have better things to do.
You could hear it in the chamber. That's the other thing. We were sitting in the chamber and we could hear them outside. So, absolutely, like that contrast was really clear.
What do you say to all the doctors and nurses who, after the pandemic, are probably still exhausted, but they're taking their time to take their feet to Queen's Park? And then, of course, we've got the education sector and LTC and all these other things. I mean, the contrast of him saying, look at all the great things we've done, when it seems like there is absolute unrest and stress in the province.
I mean, this disconnect with where people are at, you really feel it these days at Queen's Park. This government, this Premier who can stand up and literally say, things are better than they've ever been before in Ontario. And we know, and all you have, my goodness, talk to anyone. Things are not better. They're really hard for most people, and so just, grocery prices, the cost of living, rent, mortgages, it's become astronomical. People are really struggling and their wages aren't keeping up. And then the contrast that with a government that fought to suppress education workers' wages, healthcare workers' wages. The reason that we have so many nurses that have left and other healthcare workers who've left our system in just the last few years, it wasn't just the pandemic at all. It was, I mean, obviously they were exhausted, but it's also that this government showed them such disrespect. They just can't take it anymore. And so what we're seeing happening increasingly is healthcare workers understandably leaving the system, hospitals, and this really impacts smaller hospitals, particularly in smaller communities, but even like mid-sized communities where they're having to pay nursing agencies so much more because they can't find anybody else, and that they're just hemorrhaging money. I've just recently met with a couple hospitals who are worried they won't be able to make payroll. I mean, this is a massive problem. And so I really was so thankful for all of those healthcare workers that came out here to Queen's Park yesterday and shared their stories and lent their voices, because so many Ontarians are having a hard time. And this government is trying to pretend that things are better. Like it's unacceptable.
Well, on the next OShow, I'll have one of the leading advocates in that fight who was there, and she's going to be fabulous to speak with. And so I'll be promoting that as we go closer, because I want to talk about that I couldn't get over the size of that protest and the moment we're at in Ontario with healthcare. There's something going on in Hamilton, and when this airs, it'll be airing on Wednesday in Hamilton. Maybe the Education Minister has addressed this, and if he has, that's fine. But right now, there's been 4 days of bombings or bombing threats in Hamilton. And there's been silence from our education minister on that. And I understand that we're still learning more about the reasons behind the bombings and the threats of the bombings, I should say. I have kids in school, so, it's close to my heart, their hearts, they're worried about it. Should we be hearing something from the education minister, even if it's just a message to say there should be no threats of any kind towards schools? I mean, where is Steve Lecce?
Oh my goodness. Where is the Minister of Education on this? Like, I heard about this and, my heart was in my throat. Like, as a parent, that's the scariest thing. And I can only imagine how scary it is for the students there in Hamilton, their families, all the education workers in those schools. It's extremely disruptive. They need to hear the Minister of Education say, that's not acceptable. I'm worried about you. I'm there with you.
For any reason. There's no reason to ever threaten a school with a bomb. And I don't know why you can't just say that.
No, I know exactly. And I know I know you're probably thinking the same thing I am here, which is that, this is the same minister who, unfortunately, and premier, who have started to step a little into this world of, I would say, politicizing children and children's identity, and especially more vulnerable children. And I've said, and I don't hesitate, that I think that was just simply a kind of a move they were using to distract from their own scandals. Well, you can't afford to do that. Real kids' lives are at risk. It's absolutely unacceptable, and he needs to come out and be very, very clear on this point.
There's a lot of stress and a lot of crisis in this province, and I'm glad that you're willing to work with your other opposition parties to do whatever it takes to shine the light in the corners of Queen's Park. Thank you so much for being on the OShow, and hopefully we can have you on again.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. I can't wait till next time.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the OShow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OShow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OShow. It's the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the OShow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the OShow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the OShow. It's a podcast, the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. Stay informed with the OShow.